What's up, everybody? Welcome into Tom Curran's Patriots Talk podcast. The indefatigable Phil Perry alongside. We're going to speak on this podcast, presuming that the man coming in for an interview on Thursday, Mike Vrabel, was going to get the Patriots job. We don't know that that's a fait accompli, do we, Phil?
No, we don't.
No, but let's leave that little detail out and use this as a working hypothesis. So with all that said, we'll dive deeply into the Mike Vrabel candidacy and what he might bring to this team. And we will also look at the process in its entirety and whether or not the Patriots need to get a little bit back to the hard-ass vibe, which Mike Vrabel might be able to provide. All right, first up, though, let's take a look at what Mike Vrabel's offense did with Tennessee in his final year there, 2023. They went 6-11. And this is brought to you by Shaw's, presented by Shaw's, perfecting the art of fresh. You can see it right there. Titans went 6-11. They scored more than 20 points just 5 times in their 16 games. They were 33.5 on third down, 29th in the league in scoring with just 18 points a game. Red zone percentage conversion, just 26. That means that's not good. Sack percentage, they were getting lit up, 64 sacks on the year. Passing yards per game, 180.4. Total yards per game, 289. That was 28th. Phil Perry bringing in, here too, 14 touchdowns, 11 picks on the season. Okay, that's like a busy 2 weeks for Lamar Jackson. So, Phil, get in here. We will pivot, as I say it again, if Mike Vrabel is not the head coach. But presuming he is, who are the offensive coordinator candidates, and what do you want to see from this offense? And do you have any kind of Vrabel trepidation based on what you saw in Tennessee?
I think trepidation is fair to have, although you look at that roster in 2023, and it's Ryan Tannehill and Will Levis splitting time, and DeAndre Hopkins is really your only option in the passing game. And he had a pretty good year, 1,000-yard season. But after that, it's like Chigakonkwo, Tajay Spears at the running back position, Chris Moore, who I quite frankly, I feel like I know the league pretty well. I couldn't tell you what he looks like, Tom, at the receiver position. And so I think there were certainly issues there where you could explain it away and say, this guy, it doesn't mean he's a bad head coach in terms of what you're looking for offensively from your football team. I think he needs talent like anybody else. Now, what I would be looking for from an offensive coordinator is somebody who clearly can continue my quarterback's development and take Drake May to the next level. Now, does that have to be somebody who, Tom, does it have to be somebody who's got collegiate experience? Because there are those types of guys out there, run something similar that he'd be used to his 2 years at North Carolina. Does it have to be somebody with West Coast experience, which obviously he spent a lot of time getting to know this year and executed it pretty well? Maybe ideally you'd like somebody who's got a little bit of both. But I think you want somebody who can develop a young quarterback. That's number one.
I had a prominent offensive player tell me last week, Phil, the last thing Drake May needs is to be starting again from scratch. He's got the language down. There was a lot of people who had a lot of loyalty to Alex Van Pelt and what he did and what he was strapped to in terms of with the wide receiver room, with the personnel there, with the offensive line. But what that individual was lobbying for was a continuity for Drake May in terms of the language, lobbying for Alex Van Pelt. Obviously, the players don't make the decisions, and they're bigger than them, and they understand that too. Since that's not the case, how much do you want to meet Drake May halfway if you're coming in? Say if you're Josh McDaniels, former Patriots offensive coordinator who's probably forgotten more in a night's sleep than a lot of offensive coordinator candidates around the league. Or if you're Tommy Rees, or if you're Nick Caley. Let's think of those three candidates and throw Liam Cohn in there too for the hell of it, even though he might be kind of a head coaching candidate. Throw those 4 guys in, Phil. You're pretty astute on this stuff. What would you like to see from those 4? And one little nugget I'm going to throw in here. My perception as this goes along is it really feels like if it is Vrabel, there is no as yet anointed offensive coordinator coming in definitely. So before we get into those 4 candidates, Phil, I think that's excellent. I think that's really good to try and vet those candidates for what their vision would be and sit down with them if you're Mike Vrabel and say, I'm getting this right, which I think is a good thing too, to prattle on even further as to the Patriots showing urgency. Look, if it's going to be Vrabel, we want to clear the decks for him to have time to do his interviews too. Phil.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a good point. Leave enough leeway in terms of time and space for those highly coveted, highly qualified offensive minds to come in and state their case, because Mike Vrabel shouldn't have an anointed offensive coordinator as it stands right now, because every job is different. And so if he goes to Chicago and he wants somebody who's going to be perfect for Caleb Williams, and that should matter to him, that person might be different than the person that would be perfect for Drake May and whatever the Patriots have going on here on that side of the ball. So I would look at the first three names you mentioned. I do think Liam Cohen is a head coaching candidate, and my guess would be if he doesn't get a head coaching job, he's going to remain offensive coordinator for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers.
Yeah, idiot, Tom.
So not at all. I mean, it's fair to bring up, but I would stick with the three names that you mentioned. And I think with Josh McDaniels, the big thing that he would have going for him is this proven track record of developing young quarterbacks, whether it's, Mac Jones, Jimmy Garoppolo, Jacoby Brissett. He's done a good job when he has had those guys under his tutelage. Maybe you'd look at the guys in Vegas and say, well, what happened at that position while he was there? But I think by and large, you would look at Josh McDaniels and say you'd feel good about Drake May and his future being in McDaniels' hands. Now, what might be a drawback for him, Tom, and you tell me if you feel the same way, is that his experience and his language and his system is very different than the one that Drake May just ran. It doesn't mean the concepts are really all that different, because a lot of teams run the same concepts. And Josh McDaniels ran wide zone with the Patriots occasionally. It wasn't what their offense was based around, but he knows what that should look like, and he understands everything, I'm sure, that the Patriots tried to do this year with Drake May. It's just a question of how much you're putting on the quarterback position. Traditionally, Josh McDaniels' offense, a lot goes on that quarterback. In the West Coast system, a lot typically goes on the center. In L.A. right now, though, for instance, I know a lot is on Matthew Stafford because he's next level and he's played a long time and he's a really smart guy. So would you have any trepidation in terms of the system fit for Mac Jones? Jeez, that's going to take a while to get rid of. For Drake May, if Josh McDaniels were to come in.
That's why I think Josh McDaniels is such an interesting candidate, is he has had to be a chameleon in so many different circumstances because of the way the Patriots did business. So as I'm sitting here and you're talking, I'm like, he's going to lose his mind if he comes in here and he's dealing with Jalen Polk and Javon Baker and Kendrick Bourne, and they're trying to run option routes. But Kendrick Bourne had 55 catches for 800 yards. And Mac Jones had a 121. And I'll never forget this because I thought Kendrick Bourne was going to be a beast, and Mac together for a couple of years. He had 121 passer rating thrown at Kendrick Bourne. So if Kendrick Bourne's still on the team, Josh can formulate something to get to these players. I mean, think about that. Kendrick Bourne, 55 for 800. And who are the other wideouts on that team, Phil, 2021?
Devontae Parker.
In 2021?
Jacoby Myers.
Yeah, Myers. Okay. So he can get a lot out of a wide receiver room. Additionally, I would say that Josh probably would say, you know what, until I can figure out what these idiots are able to do in the wide receiver room, and I say that fondly, let's just run the 2018 offense because we have two good tight ends and we got a couple of good backs. We don't have the versatility at running back that I would like if I'm Josh McDaniels. But let's run this type of thing. And that doesn't mean that Drake has to be handing it off for the next 7 years of his career on a regular basis to Ramondre Stevenson and Antonio Gibson. But for now, Drake, we got to, until they catch up to you, until you catch up to me, we're going to be a little bit meat and potatoes.
And I was wrong on Devontae Parker. It's Nelson Aguilar, who was also on that 2021 roster. Yeah, and I agree with you. I think he would be able to mold it and form whatever he wants to do offensively to what Drake May does. And Drake May's a really smart guy. And so I think
people are going to be pissed if Drake May turns into, handing him the ball off 38 times a game.
Yeah, you'd have to build it around it just based on how the offense looks and the kind of talent he is. I mean, this is the reason why, in my opinion, Tom, this is the reason why Mike Vrabel wants the job. It's Drake May. The connection to the Patriots is nice, and it's a good story. And he's got the red jacket. And he has a relationship with the Crafts, which I do think should matter to him because he should have an idea as to just how much leeway they'll give him as the leader of the football operation. And so that's important. But what's more important is that you have the most difficult and most important position on the field filled, which these other openings, I would even look at Jacksonville and have some question marks, real question marks, about the guys getting a ton of money to play quarterback there. These other jobs just don't have that in exactly the same way. And so the McDaniels thing I think you would just wonder, okay, is that a perfect fit? Because not that McDaniel's system is at all antiquated, but I think it's just, it was so voluminous here in New England. And it asks so much of that guy at quarterback. It's not necessarily thought of around the league as the easiest thing for a young quarterback to do. Whereas, listen, Tommy Rees, who you mentioned, has a connection to Mike Vrabel, worked with Mike Vrabel in Cleveland this year. That Cleveland offense is a West Coast-based Kevin Stefanski, Alex Van Pelt. There'd probably be a lot of carryover there in terms of the language, and it might make it a little bit easier for Drake May to hit the ground running in a scheme like that one. He also worked in the college ranks. So Alabama offensive coordinator, Notre Dame offensive coordinator, maybe he's a good fit. And Nick Caley also has this West Coast tie now, having worked for Sean McVay for a couple years, combined with all the stuff that he learned under Josh McDaniels, marrying the run game to the pass game. He could do the wide zone thing because they've done some of that in LA, but they also go downhill and they run a lot of duo and a lot of stuff between the tackles. And so, he might be a little bit more of a forward-thinking kind of coordinator whenever he gets that job, because I think there would be more McVay stuff. You'd see more jet motion and more condensed alignments that lead to different types of concepts.
Which you can do with some of the staff you have. Demario Douglas should be in jet motion. He should be used like a Tyreek Hill. He's not Tyreek Hill, but he should be used in a similar fashion, Phil. I think all of those things are in play. And I am somewhat encouraged. I've been thinking all week, my presumption has been, I'll be Vrabel and McDaniels. But I really think that notion of hiring Mike and then having him do a very, what's that word? Categorical? Fundamental? What is that when you go step by step?
Deliberate?
Anyway, an exhaustive search for an offensive coordinator would be in order. One thing that I'm really concerned about, and we're going to talk about this a little bit in the second block after the commercial, but my biggest concern is, when will the backbiting stop? When will the Patriots get away from the blame laying and try and rekindle some of the esprit de corps that we saw in the early 2000s and, in 2013, 14, 15, 16, even though the esprit de corps was diminishing a little bit as the Tom Bill relationship was starting to run its course. But the backbiting has been going on. It's going on right now. Personnel blaming Mayo for not developing players. Mayo, I'm sure, blaming and his coaching staff, saying, how the hell are we supposed to make chicken salad out of this chicken poop? Robert, the only individual who I've seen really in the last 5 to 7 years, honestly and totally take blame on himself by saying, this is on me. I own this. I made a mistake. That is way too little of that here. And it goes back even further, Bill blaming Mac blaming Matt Patricia, I don't have to revisit all of it, but between Tom and Bill and Robert and the litany of people who've been pointing fingers over the years, they have to get on the same page. Can they do that if Mike Vrabel's hired and he doesn't have the opportunity to bring in his own folk?
No. Unfortunately, that's the way of the world, I think, in the NFL. And so I think that's why you're just asking a lot. If you're ownership and you're looking at Elliott Wolf and the rest of this front office, and you are even suggesting, and I don't know if this is how it'll go down, but if you're suggesting to Vrabel when he gets here that you would like for these same guys to be running the show in the front office and asking for collaboration, because as much as you might like collaboration and as much as that may help in your other businesses, and as much of a lack of collaboration might have led to the team's downfall in some ways under Bill Belichick, when you're asking for a high degree of collaboration, you are also in some ways opening up a vacuum for a lack of accountability. Well, no, he had the decision on that guy. And that guy over there, he made the call on that scheme change. And it wasn't me who drafted him in the 4th round. It was the other guy. I was taking his advice. We were trying to collaborate, Robert. I'm sorry. So you can't pin anything on anyone, or at least that's how it looks in situations like this one. And so if you are the Patriots and you are going to hire Mike Vrabel, I really think you would have to allow him to bring in someone in the front office to work over the top of everybody else. And if you want these other guys to do the legwork, that's fine. Submit the reports, give the intel, but you have to have somebody there that Vrabel trusts to really run the show in that side of the building.
Bill, last question here before we take a quick break. What if it's not Mike Vrabel and the Patriots have to either wait for Ben Johnson until they're eliminated, Detroit, for an in-person interview. That's the important thing to remember with, the Patriots being criticized for running this process with such urgency. The Patriots cannot do an in-person interview with any individual who is currently a coach under contract. Doesn't matter if they're in the playoffs or not. You can't do an in-person interview with somebody from, say, the Jacksonville Jaguars right now, because they changed the Rooney Rule, or they tweaked the ruling so that non-playoff coaches didn't get a head start on the process. So they tried to, hold the gun so that everybody starts at the same time, but still allow these virtual interviews. But nobody's going to do a virtual interview and say, that's my guy. So I don't blame the Crafts for doing this the way they have. Additionally, and I'll say this, talking to somebody in the league this morning, and they pointed out, to call these sham interviews for Pep Hamilton or Byron Leftwich misses the point to an extent of what the Rooney Rule really was trying to create, which was the opportunity for individuals to sit down in front of ownership because they were too frequently boxed out of even being exposed to it. So this gets the names of Pep Hamilton and Byron Leftwich back in circulation, allows Robert Kraft, Jonathan Kraft, whoever else, decision maker, to say, hey, we had him in. He's pretty good. We liked him. He thought, we were kind of down the road with Mike, but this is what the Rooney Rule was designed to do. So I don't know. I get the point of the shamation, but the point of the Rooney Rule initially was not to create opportunities for layup hires. It was also created to give exposure to individuals. I understand how it looks, but it was a really good point that I hadn't considered.
I think that's fair.
Pep Hamilton and Byron. Yeah, I mean, I'm not trying to make
Tom,
the apologies.
But they're not head coach. I think the pushback would be they're not head coaching candidates. They're just not. It's just not how they're looked around the league. So you can have a guy in,
say that, but
get him
when you
some
recycle
experience.
These guys' names.
Well,
when you get them back in circulation, it helps. I know I'm talking over your ass, but I wanted to do that. Sorry.
I don't know. I honestly, with these two individuals that they had in, I don't know how much it helps because I just don't.
That's so mean.
Listen. This is just what I've been told. Somebody in the league texts me when news breaks that these are the two guys that are in, and tells me these guys aren't OC candidates. Never mind head coaching candidates. So yeah, sure, there's some benefit, but Tom, the rule is to, in my opinion, get qualified people the kind of experience you're talking about. Qualified people who deserve it. They could pull anybody off the street and say, we're getting this guy's name in circulation. Good for him. And it doesn't really do him any favors because everybody knows that he's not seriously considered for that kind of job.
See, and I think that smacks of just what we're talking about for the last however many years. And not to be accusatory in that vein of a level of, racism, but we're diminishing when we dismiss Byron Leftwich as not suitable to be a head coach. He was a Super Bowl.
It's not me.
Offensive coordinator.
I'm just telling you, it's not me. This is the league.
I know, and I'm
viewed.
saying the league.
Yeah.
This is the same stuff writ large, but under a different guise.
But you would never see somebody like that get a head coaching job.
But I guess that's the point. And you also wonder, well, what's at play there? Why is he a former Super Bowl offensive coordinator so easily dismissed? Is it because it was Brady and he was running the offense and it was Bruce Arians and no one takes him seriously? It's a very interesting and slippery slope. But what if it's Vrabel? Go ahead.
I think the problem is, and whether it's a problem or not, like, quite frankly, I think we see this stuff happen all the time. It is a flawed rule. The Rooney Rule is flawed. Yep. And so I don't necessarily blame the Patriots for going about it the way they did, especially because I think they feel like they're in a rush to get Mike Vrabel because I think they feel like he's in a little bit of a rush. He started doing his interviews before the season even ended. So he's interviewed with the Jets. He's already
around for a year.
He's already interviewed with the Bears. It seems like he wants to get this thing rolling wherever it is for him very soon. And so if the Patriots really want him, and I don't blame them because I personally think he's the best candidate for them, then they might have to act quickly. And so in order to act quickly and be able to hire him quickly, you had to get two guys that are out of football so that they could interview in person to satisfy this league-mandated rule. And so, again, it's flawed, and I don't necessarily – the part of it that I don't blame them for is getting it done quickly. it looks bad. The optics are bad because the people you brought in are not considered head coaching people when there are plenty of minority candidates that are in the league. You would have to wait to interview them, but there are plenty of guys that would fit the suit better than the two that they brought in. No offense to those guys, but that's just how the league's looking at it.
I just don't think there's a million guys out of work, white, black, whatever, who are immediately people say, "Oh, well, that was a reasonable guy to have."
No,
like,
there's not, and that's why I say the timing of it. This is why.
So you got to do it. So that's why that tweak to the rule sucks. The tweak to the rule sucks. They got to let these individuals be interviewed at their own location for an hour. Crafts want to interview Ben Johnson. Get on your plane, scoot out to Detroit, sit down with him for an hour and a half. And I know that our great friend Mike Florio said every second that you're not spending every second you spend preparing for an interview is a second you're spending not preparing for your current situation. Sorry, tough, too bad. You're not going to be preparing for your playoff game 24 hours a day. The hay's in the barn eventually for every one of these games. And if not, you're fucking up. Okay. What if it's not Vrabel or Johnson? Phil, what do they do then? What if Mike Vrabel says, yeah, no.
Well, number one, that would be a bit of a mess because it seems like they really, really want him. And it seems like he wants them. And so something would have had to go very much awry for that to happen. But I would say this. I would say, number one, again, optically, and I don't necessarily care about that. Like, I personally, maybe fans would, especially if Vrabel goes elsewhere and ends up having success and you're still mired in a 4-13 or 3-14 type of team in 2025 because you ended up with another rookie head coach when you really didn't want one. But I think the happy accident of maybe missing out on Vrabel would be that you do get to go through a thorough search. Like, if they get Vrabel, I think it's going to happen fast. If they don't, well, now you've got time. You've got time to truly interview Ben Johnson, to truly interview Aaron Glenn, to wait until the Vikings are out of the playoffs and you can interview Brian Flores or you could interview Liam Cohen. All of these options now become available to you, and you can get the benefit of learning from these guys of how to fix your football team and how their operations work in the cities that they're in right now and the modernized things that they're doing there that might be able to help your program. Whether you hire that guy or not, you might be able to implement those things down the line. You're also just building a Rolodex in terms of understanding who the smart people in the league are. And so when it does come time to maybe look for a head coach again, God forbid, or an offensive coordinator or defensive coordinator, you know more about these people. They just haven't had the benefit of these types of searches lately. And so to me, that would be a benefit in a bad situation for them, which would be they don't end up with Vrabel.
It would be a bad situation because, to me, one of the great advantages of an individual having been out of work for a year, quote unquote, he was a consultant with the Cleveland Browns this year, is that individual gets to create his vision, hone his vision, understand the opportunities out there. You're not on the hook for preparing a defense for the Minnesota Vikings or an offense for the Detroit Lions as you go through the year. You know who your candidates are for OC, your short list, and you'll be calling them immediately. Your tight ends coach, your offensive line. You can get up to date on every salary cap situation of prospective jobs. You don't think Mike Vrabel knows what the salary cap situation is on every single one of these teams? He does. That's why I look at the great advantage. Tom Coughlin, when he was hired as the Jacksonville Jaguars head coach in 1995, he left BC and took an entire year off to prepare, and he had like a 500-page manila, well, can't put that in a manila, binder of what his vision was. And the Jacksonville Jaguars were quite quickly a force to be reckoned with in the American Football Conference. All right, we're going to take a break. When we come back, we'll talk about the hard-ass vibe. Did the Patriots' ass get too soft? Was it too hard when Bill was here? What is just right?
There's been no indication in the past 36 hours that it's anybody but Vrabel and that they're doing this for any reason other than get Vrabel. Member of the Patriots Hall of Fame, Bill Belichick with charm, some charm, depending upon, how pissy he is that day.
I remember Coach Belichick was like, I think he would be a pretty damn good coach. He's enough of an that he can go and be a head coach, because to be a head coach in this league, you got to have just a little bit of an into you.
All right, that's Devin McCourty and Mike Florio, Pro Football Talk, talking about the fact that Mike Vrabel could be just what the Patriots needed. Phil, you were there at the Combine last February when Elliott Wolf talked about a little bit less of a hard-ass vibe. The notion that Mike Vrabel will bring this hard-ass vibe with him, how will players react to Mike Vrabel's hard-assery?
I think it could be really interesting, although some of these guys do have experience with Bill Belichick, and so they would be maybe accustomed to it to a degree. A lot of these guys, including your rookie quarterback, first and foremost, is more used to a very different sort of style, it seems. And so I don't know, quite frankly, Tom. I think it's exactly what they need to some degree, especially when I think about positions like the receiver group. If that has in any way, shape, or form a similar look to it in 2025, they could use a Mike Vrabel getting after him a little bit more to try to get a little bit more out of that group. And so whether it's the lowlights that'll show in the meetings, whether it's on the field, he'll put his hands on you. You know, you're talking about technique. I've seen him line up with defensive linemen in the trenches and go into pass sets and really go at it with guys. Like, that's the kind of thing that I think, you know, when you have a roster that needs all of the augmenting that it can get, when you're trying to squeeze every last drop out of every single player, I think his style actually could be really good.
And that's what I was kind of driving at with the empathetic aspect. I think he does have a knack for mentoring. And you've heard players talk about it. There was a Cleveland Browns player this year who was struggling with weight. And if you read the Athletic story, from which I'm just about to quote, he asked, can Vrabel come with us on these trips just to kind of oversee me with my eating? Because I can't help myself. And Vrabel's like, yeah, I'll go. Please read the story in the Athletic. Very well done on Mike Vrabel and what he spent his offseason doing. But I want to read this to you from that story because way down at the end of it, it details what Mike Vrabel wants in his next opportunity. So this is from the Athletic story that went up last week. Quote, there's got to be clear communication with ownership so that we understand as coaches what the expectations are, so that we can explain to them what's reasonable, what we can do, what we probably can do, and what we're going to try to do or die trying. So that to me is number one. That's interesting. I want to be able to sit there and say, Robert, these guys are pretty messed up. There's infighting, there's dysfunction, there's not enough talent. We've got a shitload of salary cap money here, but we don't have perhaps all the free agents out there that we need. And we'll see what happens in the draft. But this is going to take a minute. So that means if you fire me after year 2 or year 3, I want my money doubled. Anyway, moving on to the next thing. Sorry. Mike also says, I want to have a structure in place that people see the game the same way I do from X's and O's standpoint, from a personnel standpoint with team building. We would hopefully have that alignment, which is critical. Again, pausing, Phil, we just saw Rand Carthen, who was hired to oversee the personnel department in Tennessee in 2023. He was fired, but that was a smoking gun for what happened with Vrabel. John Robinson and Vrabel worked together. They didn't always see eye to eye. Then there was a new personnel person brought in. It was Rand Carthen. So he had personnel problems there. That's why we look at the Elliott Wolf situation here. This has to be better. And then finally, Phil, Vrabel says, I would like to be able to say that there's a quarterback that you feel like you can win with, or that there's a path to find the one that you can win with. So what do the Patriots have that Vrabel's looking for right now, Phil?
I think he'd have that open line of communication with ownership for sure, and he'd have the quarterback. And, you know, I think the TBD would be, you know, I guess the vision, the organizational direction, although any team that's looking for a new head coach, in my opinion, wouldn't have that. That doesn't exist anywhere with any of these openings, in my opinion. I don't think any of them check that box. I think. Which
one, the clear path to personnel?
No, this would be isn't there something in there about organizational vision, about, you know, direction and, you know, sort of.
Yeah, I want to have a structure in place so people see the game the same way from X's and O's and personnel standpoint.
Yeah, well, that would require bringing in your guy on the personnel side. So, Tom, this is the best job because of the quarterback, period. End of story for him. It's not insignificant at all. I think the path to a quarterback is really difficult this year because there's not a lot of great quarterbacks in the draft. There might be somebody like J.J. McCarthy, and maybe Tom Brady's got a great plan as to how he's going to acquire J.J. McCarthy from the Minnesota Vikings. I think it's really hard to argue that that's a better situation than what the Patriots have here. with that particular nugget.
But this is an interesting thought that I had. Who exactly is selling who here? Is Mike Vrabel selling himself to the Patriots, or the tables turned a little bit and the Patriots are in a position where, yeah, we have 6 Super Bowls and we were an incredible team, but we're, one of the worst teams in football, proven so over the last 4 years. And they have to sell themselves to Mike Vrabel. Who is doing the selling?
I think it's probably more the latter. I think Vrabel has more leverage here because he's going to have a bunch of teams interested. And the Patriots really, in my opinion, have one guy that they have their eye on. And based on some of the conversations I've had, I don't think the Crafts are going to be all that thrilled to bring in a rookie head coach after having just had a rookie head coach. And so whereas there are other teams in the league, I think that would say, well, Vrabel, great candidate. Johnson, great candidate. Aaron Glenn, great candidate. I think the Patriots are looking at one guy. And the only other guy who might kind of fit the bill for them is a guy they haven't even put in to interview yet, and that's Brian Flores. And I have no idea if they'd be interested. I just know that he's at least done the job before, which I think is attractive to them, especially in the wake of firing Gerard Mayo. And so Vrabel has all the leverage, except I would just add, Tom, again, the Patriots are the one team with the quarterback. And so Vrabel, in my opinion, is really going to want them too.
Bears, though.
The Bears quarterback is not as good, period. And I don't think the never mind as good, not as good. I think the quarterback there and the personality fit with the head coach wouldn't be quite the same sort of snug fit that it would be here in New England. Do you think that's fair to say? Based on what we know of Caleb Williams?
Yeah, no, I think Caleb Williams surprised people over the last calendar year with how much more coachable and less of a diva. But given what we saw at USC and what his reputation was coming into the league, I think that's fair.
I don't think he did himself any favors in terms of like his. You're right. He wasn't a diva, Tom. I don't think he's also seen as like this really mentally tough guy either after the season he just had.
All right. Well, we're going to wrap it up here. Phil, you got a Next Pat's podcast guest from this week that we can tell the people about?
Yeah, we had James Palmer, Underdog Fantasy, Bleacher Report, formerly NFL Network. Really, really plugged in dude. So great to talk to him about both Vrabel, who he knows really well from covering the Titans for a long time, and Ben Johnson. Really good insight into the personalities of these two guys. You really couldn't find two more different head coaching candidates, and they're the two bells of the ball this offseason. So great to talk to him. Check that out.
Remember, that's Bells, Bells, not Bells. All right, folks, enjoy your weekend. By the time we talk to you next, there might be a head coach in place. Could be the lantern-jawed Mike Vrabel. See ya.